In this video, we are going to talk about the history of the hottest team in baseball right now, the Milwaukee Brewers. Stick with me and let me tell you all about it. What is going on, everybody? Thanks for joining me back on my channel, Brutus on Baseball. This video is the 13th team history video that I've done. So if you haven't checked out to see if I've done your favorite team, go back and look at the catalog. You'll be able to find another 12 on top of this one. But today's video is going to be all about the Milwaukee Brewers. As always, I put a post up in my community chat to vote on which team I should be doing, and the Milwaukee Brewers just edged out the Chicago Cubs in a very tight race among 4 playoff-bound teams. So let's get right into it, the history of the Milwaukee Brewers. At first glance, the history of the Brewers franchise is relatively short, starting in 1970 with their first season in Milwaukee. But the roots of both the Major League Baseball team and baseball in Milwaukee go back much further than that. The name Milwaukee Brewers was initially used in the late 1800s for a variety of Milwaukee-based teams, including official teams in the Union Association in 1884 and the American Association in 1891. The brand new American League also established the Milwaukee Brewers during their inaugural season to rival the National League in 1901. But that team would move on quickly after only one season to become the St. Louis Browns in 1902 and eventually the Baltimore Orioles in 1954, so they're not actually tied together. But even if the Milwaukee Brewers weren't continuous in major leagues, the Milwaukee Brewers name would continue to be used by the city's minor league team, a member of the American Association from 1902 all the way to 1952, giving it a long history in the city. Once Major League Baseball started to consider the concept of expansion further west in the 1950s, Milwaukee had been eyed by several team owners as a viable landing spot. The first was Bill Veeck, former owner of the Milwaukee Brewers AAA club in the 1940s, and now owner of the St. Louis Browns in 1952. Milwaukee had built a brand new stadium for the 1953 season, Milwaukee County Stadium, with the hope to someday attract a major league team to the city. And after Veeck had lost out on the Battle of St. Louis against the Cardinals, a story that I told in my video on the history of the Baltimore Orioles, he wanted to move the Browns to Milwaukee, only to be vetoed by the other major league owners. This allowed the owner's preferred franchise, the Boston Braves, to move at the last minute during spring training of 1953 to play the 53 season as the Milwaukee Braves. Now, the Braves aren't tied to the Brewers either, and they wouldn't last long in Milwaukee, playing there from 1953 to 1966 before moving to Atlanta. But a minority owner of that Milwaukee-based Braves team was a young automobile dealer by the name of Alan H. Bud Selig. And when the Braves left town, Selig stayed and formed a new group to lobby Major League Baseball for a new team in Milwaukee, which he named the Milwaukee Brewers Baseball Club, in honor of the minor league team he grew up watching. During the 1968 and 69 seasons, he actually got the Chicago White Sox ownership group to play 9 and 11 home games in Milwaukee, and almost a third of the attendance for all White Sox home games those 2 seasons came from just those handful of home games in Milwaukee, showing that the city of Milwaukee was eager to have a major league team once again. Selig attempted to purchase the White Sox in 1969 and move the team to Milwaukee, but the transaction was vetoed by the other team owners because they wanted to keep American League team in Chicago. And as a result, the path to the Milwaukee Brewers first had to make a pit stop in Seattle. A couple major league teams briefly considered moving to Seattle, including the Cleveland Indians in 1964 and the Kansas City Athletics in 1967, but it wasn't until 1968 that a man by the name of Dewey Soriano, general manager and former president of the Pacific Coast League, finally convinced Major League Baseball to expand with a new team in Seattle. Initially, the Seattle Pilots were supposed to play for the 1971 season, but their expansion partner, the Kansas City Royals, had political backing to push Major League Baseball to move up the expansion to 1969 2 years ahead of time, as the Athletics had just split town for Oakland in 1967, and Kansas City didn't want to go 2 more seasons without a major league team. So Soriano suddenly had to scramble to put a team on the field and didn't do a great job of recruiting local investors. So when the time came, he had to lean on William Daley, former owner of the Cleveland Indians, whom he had developed a relationship of sorts a few years before when the Indians had looked at moving to the Pacific Northwest. Daley ended up with a 47% ownership of the Pilots, the largest shareholder, and the Pilots were officially born 2 years premature in 1969. The Seattle Pilots were incredibly unsuccessful in their first year on and off the field, failing to draw many fans and finishing in last place in the American League West. And the debacle was chronicled in one of the most popular baseball books in history, Jim Bouton's Ball 4, that showed the absurdity of the Seattle clubhouse at times. And in their lone year as the Seattle Pilots in 1969, the team played in Sick's Stadium, which was built in 1938 and was previously the home of the Seattle Rainiers of the Pacific Coast League. But the stadium was deteriorating rapidly, which had been exacerbated by the 2-year jumpstart in 1969 for expansion that didn't allow for many renovations to take place. Soriano was in trouble quick. William Daley refused to put more money into the team, and it was obvious by the end of the first year that the team would not survive without either new ownership or a new stadium to quickly replace the aging Sick's Stadium, or both. Soriano was urged by Major League Baseball to sell the team, and he met secretly for several months with Bud Selig, who wanted to move the team to Milwaukee immediately. Soriano and Selig came to a deal, but it was struck down by the Pilots' remaining ownership group as a result of pressure from Washington state politicians to keep the team in Seattle. Eventually, the other team owners in the American League loaned the Pilots enough money to send the team to spring training in 1970, even though it wasn't entirely clear where they would be playing. Even with the loan, Soriano and Daley would declare bankruptcy during spring training of 1970, forcing the league to take over the team. The league wanted to sell the team to Selig, but the fate of the team hung in the balance of the court system as the state of Washington filed an injunction to stop the team from leaving. With no money available to pay the coaches and players, all the players would be declared free agents, and the team disbanded, throwing the entire season schedule into chaos and ushering in the uncertainty of what free agency could look like. That's the last thing that the league wanted, especially in that time period. And with only 7 days before the start of the 1970 season, the federal bankruptcy court granted the sale to Selig, and the team's new home would be Milwaukee. The story goes that just before the season began, all the team's gear was in Provo, Utah, waiting to hear if they would be heading to Seattle or Milwaukee instead. The team would be renamed the Brewers, of course. They set up shop in Milwaukee County Stadium, the same stadium that had first housed the Braves and now would be the Brewers' home from 1970 through the 2000 season. The Brewers would bring the struggles of the Seattle Pilots with them to Milwaukee, though, posting a losing record each of their first 8 seasons in Wisconsin. But one thing the Brewers did very right almost immediately was bringing on former big league catcher and Milwaukee native Bob Uecker to be the play-by-play voice of the team starting in 1971. Uecker was a much better announcer than he was a baseball player, and his humor shined for the team over 54 seasons of broadcasting until 2024, just before his passing in January of 2025 at the age of 90. And another quick addition to the family was Milt Mason, who dressed as Bernie Brewer, and he locked himself into a trailer atop the scoreboard at County Stadium in late June, vowing not to come back out until the team drew the first crowd of 40,000 fans. That would finally happen on August 16, 1970, and Bernie Brewer was able to descend almost 2 months later. An action that would become tradition over the years. First, where Bernie would slide into a giant beer mug whenever a Brewer would hit a home run in County Stadium, and then carrying over into the new stadium, where Bernie had a much fancier slide whenever that Brewer hit a home run at home. There wasn't a whole lot that went well for the Brewers in the early 70s though, but the fans had reason to cheer by 1975 when they made a trade with the Atlanta Braves to bring back Hank Aaron to Milwaukee to finish up his incredible career by hitting the last 22 of his 755 career home runs in a Milwaukee Brewers uniform. And even during that first difficult decade, the Brewers had even more reason to be optimistic as they welcomed some of the best players in franchise history during that time. Starting with Gorman Thomas, who would eventually be the first Brewer to win the home run crown in 1979, and followed by Robin Yount debuting in 1974 and Paul Molitor in 1978. With the influx of young talent, the Brewers would roll out their first 3 winning seasons from 1978 to 1980. While also making some very astute trades for players like Cecil Cooper, a single trade with the Cardinals that would bring over Raleigh Fingers, Ted Simmons, and Pete Vukovich in 1981, and finally a trade to bring Don Sutton at the deadline in 1982 to support their playoff run that season. Although they didn't make the playoffs between 1978 and 1980, the Brewers would make their first postseason appearance in 1981, winning the second half of that strike-shortened season that gave them an automatic berth into the postseason. They would lose in the postseason that year, though, and then follow that up with a slow start in 1982. With a record of 23-24 early in 82, they fired their manager and brought in Harvey Kuhn. Under Kuhn, the Brewers would finish the season going 72-43 under an incredible offense and earning the nickname Harvey's Wallbangers. They would finish in first place in 1982, beating out the Orioles by 1 game on the last day of the season, and they would make their second postseason appearance and their first World Series appearance in that season. The Brew Crew would meet up with those St. Louis Cardinals in what would be named the Suds Series, honoring the beer brewing history of both cities. But they would lose the series to the Cardinals in 7 games. After losing that series in 1982, the Brewers would enter a period of mediocrity for quite some time, hovering just above or below 500 and not making a single postseason appearance for the next 26 years between 1983 and 2007. There were some fun times and good teams during that time period behind guys like Teddy Higuera, Jeff Cirillo, and Jeff Jenkins, but not enough to really get excited about at any one time. One lone bright spot would be the start of the 1987 season, where the Brewers would win their first 13 straight games to open that season, although they would go on to drop 12 straight before mid-May and finish in 3rd place in the division that year. But back in the 1940s, the restaurant chain George Webb offered free burgers to everyone if the Brewers minor league team at that time ever won 12 games in a row. The minor league team never did accomplish that feat, nor did the Milwaukee Braves or the Brewers until that 1987 season. But now that they had won 12 in a row, George Webb kept their promise after all those years and handed out over 168,000 burgers in 1987, over 190,000 when the Brewers did it again in 2018, and most recently the story made the national stage again when the Brewers did it one more time this year in 2025. But going back to the 80s and 90s, although it wasn't a great time for the team on the field, there were a number of things going on in the background that would change the landscape of the game of baseball forever. The most obvious was Bud Selig being named as the acting commissioner of baseball in 1992. For quite some time, Selig had been a staunch supporter and a favorite of the other team owners. A great example of Selig's values as an owner was his front and center role in collusion from 1985 to 1987. For those that don't know, collusion was a response to the recent advent of free agency in baseball, and an attempt by the owners across the league to work together to depress player salaries by colluding against them in free agent negotiations. I talk about it all in my video series about the history of free agency if you want to learn more about it. But the owners eventually lost out in court and had to pay out $280 million to the players because of collusion. But Selig and the other owners came out relatively clean on the other side of that story. And it was the story of collusion that brought Selig eventually into the role of being commissioner. You see, Fay Vincent was commissioner at that time, and he was quite vocal about condemning the owners for their actions and trying to repair the relationship with the Players Association. But more and more owners were lining up against Vincent, with Selig perhaps being his biggest opponent at that time. He soon became a leader for Vincent's removal as commissioner, and after a vote of no confidence in 1992, Vincent resigned and the owners voted in Selig as acting commissioner. Selig would continue to run the Brewers while in the role of acting commissioner from 1992 to 1997, and he took little time proving that he would be a commissioner loyal to the owners. In only his second year as acting commissioner, he first created the wild card and divisional series to expand the playoffs and bring more money into the owners' pockets. He reinstated George Steinbrenner from his lifetime ban from the game, and he locked out the players and oversaw the 1994 strike, where baseball lost the World Series for the first time since 1904 because the owners were pushing for a salary cap, and the players just didn't trust them. After finally being approved as full-time commissioner for the 1998 season, Selig transferred ownership of the Brewers to his daughter, Wendy Selig Priebe, to avoid the appearance, at least, of a conflict of interest. Of course, most people believe that Selig remained a participant in the running of the Brewers, at least to some extent. Baseball did see a number of great things happen during his reign as commissioner, though, like another expansion in 1998, interleague play, and a 400% increase in revenue for the sport during his tenure, and the game itself changing as the PED era was ushered in under the oversight of Selig. But of course, Selig's hands were mostly clean after his retirement, as he was ushered into the Hall of Fame on his first try, in a specially formulated election in 2016, when the Hall of Fame completely rejigged the Veterans Committee. But all that is a story for another day. Getting back to the Brewers. With that aforementioned round of expansion in 1998, Major League Baseball found itself with new teams in Arizona and Tampa Bay. The problem baseball had was that there were now 30 teams, 15 of which could be in each league, but that would result in an imbalanced schedule that couldn't get figured out without regular interleague play. Selig wanted to move the Brewers to the National League, which had several financial benefits, but concerned with the conflict of interest, Major League Baseball first offered the opportunity to the Kansas City Royals to change leagues. And when Kansas City declined the invitation, the Brewers were next in line and accepted. It was the first time a team had switched leagues since the modern era started in 1901, and there were now 16 teams in the National League and only 14 in the American League. The team finally found themselves back in the National League for the first time since the Milwaukee Braves had spent their 13 seasons there and left in 1966. And another reason was to try and establish a rivalry between the Brewers and the nearby Chicago Cubs. You see, the Brewers have never really had a rival. If you ask the Cubs, they would dismiss the Brewers and point to the Cardinals as their main rival. But the Brewers still wanted to establish a rivalry of some sort, and their rivalry with the Cubs was the most logical and became more prevalent with their move to the National League, even if it still isn't all that much of a two-way rivalry. And so the move to the National League coincided with the team rebrand and a move into a new ballpark for the 2000 season. Under construction was the new state-of-the-art Miller Park, with a retractable roof slated for the 2000 season. But the collapse of a crane while building the stadium resulted in a delay in construction and an opening date for 2001 instead. There were many factors that led to the crane collapse, and as a result, 3 workers lost their lives. The Brewers still rebranded in the year 2000, though, a year ahead of the new park opening. And the Brewers have played in Miller Park, later renamed American Family Field, from 2001 to the time of this video. But even through all of Bud Selig's accomplishments as commissioner and the team moving into a brand new ballpark, the team on the field struggled dramatically. The Seligs announced in early 2004 that the team would be for sale, And near the conclusion of that same season, the team was sold to Los Angeles investment banker Mark Attanasio. And under the new ownership, and with an influx of some money, the Brewers would start to come out of their slump in 2007, behind a new crop of young players like Ben Sheets, Ryan Braun, and Prince Fielder. And they performed even better in 2008. At the 2008 trade deadline, they would make perhaps the biggest deal in team history, trading for CC Sabathia with the Indians, who would go on to achieve an 11-2 record with a 1.65 ERA for the Brewers to finish that season, often seen as one of the best trade rentals in history, and propelling the Brewers into the playoffs that season for the first time since 1982. They would lose in the National League Division Series and miss the playoffs for the next 2 seasons, though. The Brewers made another big trade ahead of the 2010 season, bringing in Zach Greinke this time. They would go on to set a franchise record with 96 wins that season and make the playoffs again in 2011. They would advance that year to the National League Championship Series, but would lose against the St. Louis Cardinals once again, and were denied another chance at the World Series. But 2011 would be the end of their good fortunes at that time, as Prince Fielder would leave after the 2011 season to sign in free agency with the Detroit Tigers, and the legend of Ryan Braun began to crumble in Milwaukee with one of baseball's biggest steroid scandals. Braun had been seen by fans as perhaps the future best player in Brewers history, a Rookie of the Year, an MVP, a 5-time All-Star in his first 5 full years, and the first player in franchise history to reach a 30-30 season in 2011 and then a 40-30 season in 2012. But in October 2011, Braun was given a random urine test for performance-enhancing drugs. A source was quoted that said the results were insanely high, twice the level of the highest test ever taken in baseball. He was to be suspended for 50 games, but Braun would appeal, claiming that the samples had been mishandled. Under the agreement, samples were to be sent to the laboratory on the same day they were collected, but as the test was taken late on a Saturday, there were no FedEx centers open, and the sample was stored according to protocol until it could be dropped off the next Monday morning. Although there was no evidence the sample had been tampered with at all, and there was no scientific explanation for the testosterone levels observed unless they had been in Braun's body, an arbitration panel overturned the suspension on that technicality, and Braun was temporarily off the hook. But just about a year later, in early 2013, Braun was implicated in the biogenesis scandal that also brought down Alex Rodriguez with a suspension. Major League Baseball gathered enough evidence against Braun that they suspended him for 65 games and the 2013 postseason. And Braun accepted it and eventually issued an apology for his PED use and actions. Worse than just the use of PEDs, though, were the lies he told during the previous 2011 failed test and investigation, and actions he took to discredit the test collector that had done everything by the book. And so goes the legend of what could have been Ryan Braun. It would take the Brewers several more years to get a glimpse of the playoffs after that, with the moment that propelled them back into the hunt being the 2018 trade and eventual contract extension for Christian Yelich from the Miami Marlins. Add in a consistent influx of young players like signing Lorenzo Cain, Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, Josh Hader, Willy Adames, Devin Williams, William Contreras, and Jackson Chourio most recently through the years, and the most recent run of 6 playoff appearances in the last 8 years between 2018 and 2024, soon to make it 7 appearances in 9 years with their 2025 season that they're having, is the most successful stretch of baseball in franchise history. Unfortunately, though, they have exited the playoffs very early almost every single one of those seasons, with 2018 being their deepest run in that stretch, losing again in the National League Championship Series. So looking through all of that history, the Brewers have been to the playoffs a total of 10 times out of 56 seasons, with an 11th trip almost guaranteed in their 57th season of 2025. Being one of only 2 teams to have switched leagues during their history, they have represented the American League in the World Series only that one time in 1982, losing to the St. Louis Cardinals, and have not yet appeared in a World Series to represent the National League. They are one of only 5 Major League teams that have not yet brought home a World Series victory, and they're tied with the San Diego Padres as the oldest franchises to not yet do so. So let's move on to the team uniforms and the logos. Has anyone noticed that the team colors for the Seattle Mariners and the Milwaukee Brewers are incredibly similar? Well, the Seattle Pilots colors were blue and gold, the primary colors that the Mariners would eventually pick up as well. But upon moving to Milwaukee, Bud Selig actually wanted to change the team colors from the blue and gold of the Pilots to dark blue and red, previously used by the Milwaukee Brewers minor league team for so many years, and similar to the Braves colors from their time in Milwaukee. But the move to Milwaukee had come so late before the season that the team had no choice but to use the uniforms that came from Seattle and just remove the Pilots logos and substitute in Brewers logos, keeping the same blue and gold color scheme that the Pilots had used. And after establishing that look in their first season in Milwaukee, the Brewers just kept that same color scheme throughout the years. The first couple years, the uniforms were fairly simple, with that block M on the hat and block Brewers lettering across the jersey. But through the 1970s, the Brewers started having a little bit more fun with their uniforms, first using powder blues for road jerseys, and then bringing in the pinstripes for home uniforms around 1978. Their look was fairly consistent though through the years, until they brought in dark blue jerseys circa 1994, and finally some all gold uniforms that they use on occasion. The evolution of the logos first started with that steering wheel with wings of the Seattle Pilots, followed by Selig's personal favorite, a beer barrel man swinging a bat from 1970 to 1977. But coinciding with the Brewers starting to win in 1978, they had introduced one of the most genius logos in Major League history, with the ball and glove logo and the lowercase m and b representing the city and the team names hidden in that glove. This logo was obtained from a contest, and the winning entrant was a 30-year-old college art student that got $2,000 for the design with no ongoing royalties. The ball and glove logo lasted from 1978 to 1993, when the team brought in a new interlocking M and B logo superimposed over crossed bats and a baseball diamond that would last from 1994 to 1999. The year 2000 brought in a rebranding, with the cursive Brewers and eventually that stylized M with the use of a husk of wheat to accentuate the design and relationship with the brewing history of the city. And finally, in 2020, the team brought back the incredibly popular and nostalgic ball and glove logo to represent the team again. Now let's talk about the Brewers' best players in history. The Brewers have a reasonable list of players winning awards in their history given their relatively short time as a team. There have been 5 MVP winners in Rollie Fingers in 1981, Robin Yount twice in 82 and 89, with one playing at shortstop and the other one in center field, Ryan Braun in 2011, and Christian Yelich in 2018. And finally, there's been 3 Cy Young Award winners, with Rollie Fingers in 1981, the same year that he won the MVP, and the first time in Major League history for a relief pitcher to win both the Cy Young and the MVP awards in the same season. And then there was Pete Vukovich in 1982 and Corbin Burns in 2021. A total of 9 players in the Hall of Fame represent the Brewers franchise history, plus a certain former owner and commissioner of baseball, Bud Selig. The list of players is short, so I'll go through it here. It consists of several players that played for the crew only for a short period of time, including Hank Aaron, Don Sutton, Rollie Fingers, Ted Simmons, Trevor Hoffman, Dave Parker, and CC Sabathia. Only 2 players are in the Hall of Fame wearing a Brewers cap, the greats Robin Yount and Paul Molitor. The Brewers have retired a total of 4 jersey numbers from Brewers players. That includes Molitor, Yount, Rollie Fingers, and Hank Aaron. And for whatever reason, they retired the number 1 as well, in honor of Bud Selig. The next Brewers player that will be elected to the Hall of Fame will likely be Zack Greinke, who pitched a brief time for Milwaukee before being traded away. And after Greinke, you'd have to look at currently active players. although there just aren't that many. Perhaps you can try to make a case for some of the pitchers like Corbin Burns, Josh Hader, or even Devin Williams, but they're all just too far away from the ends of their career. The closest to the Hall is likely Christian Yelich, but he's been slowed down in recent years by injuries, especially back injuries, so it's hard to see him on that trajectory right now. Josh Hader is probably next in line after Yelich, and looking back, there aren't too many guys that could get voted in through the classic or contemporary era committees for the Hall of Fame, so the Brewers may have to rely on Yelich to keep it going into his twilight years, or younger guys like Jackson Chourio or maybe even William Contreras to really live up to their potential for years and years to come. The list of best players in Brewers history starts with Robin Yount, who played his entire 20-year career with Milwaukee, amassing over 3,000 hits and over 250 home runs and stolen bases. Number 2 would be Paul Molitor, who played 15 of his 21 years with Milwaukee, also amassing over 3,000 hits with 234 home runs and over 500 stolen bases, primarily as a leadoff type hitter. Brewers fans might hate me for this, but next I would have to put Ryan Braun. Despite the steroid scandal, he still played all 14 of his seasons in Milwaukee and finished with 47 WAR and a 134 OPS+. In 4th place, I would put Cecil Cooper, who played 11 years in Milwaukee and retired as a Brewer, a perennial 300 type hitter and a force in the Brewer lineup through the best years of the early 1980s. And for the 5th spot, I would have to pick Christian Yelich, who has been with the Brewers for 8 seasons now, and if he can keep his back healthy, could definitely see himself moving up this list a few more spots by the time he's done. The list of best pitchers of all time for the Brewers is really short, but it would have to start with Teddy Higuera, who stormed the major leagues as a young pitcher and pitched all 9 of his seasons in Milwaukee as one of the best players to ever come from Mexico, but had his career cut short because of arm injuries. Ben Sheets, another young Brewers phenom who saw his career cut way too short from arm and shoulder injuries as well, is probably the number 2 pitcher in the history of the franchise. I'd put Brandon Woodruff at number 3, which surprised me a bit, but he's just been a very steady contributor for his 8 seasons with the Brewers. Number 4, I'd put Chris Bosio, another very steady pitcher who I would have ranked higher, but he only spent 7 of his seasons in Milwaukee. And rounding it out with number 5, it was a tough choice for this spot between Giovanni Gallardo or Corbin Burns. But I went with Gallardo, as he spent 2 more solid seasons in Milwaukee than Burns did before getting traded, and he was consistent while Burns had some dominant seasons, but also some very bad ones early on in his career with the Brew Crew. So there you have it. That's my history of the Milwaukee Brewers. It'll be exciting to see what they do in 2025, and hopefully this is the team that breaks through the postseason and is able to reach the World Series for the first time since 1982. And in the meantime, keep talking baseball, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you around.